welcome to the First Take podcast, where every now and then some of our staff and our friends are going to get together to talk about different things going on in our world. My name is John. I'm joined by Seth, Beau, and Bryan. Say hello, guys.
Hello, guys.
Howdy.
As you all can tell, we are really into physical fitness, everybody around this table. And so all of us have been working out. And I'd like to know what you guys are doing lately to work out. Let's start with you, Bryan.
So, because you're kind of an accountability partner on this. I go to Hot Works and sweat like crazy and do all kinds of like cross training and isometric stuff. It's awful. Yeah,
I was going to say, I go to Hot Works too. I hate every second of it.
Every second. Every single second.
Until I leave. Like the last 5 seconds of every class is where I really enjoy it.
Because you're looking forward to the promised land.
That's it.
Air conditioning.
Yeah. Oh, your workouts, you've been doing something that's a little different though.
Yeah, so I've been in physical therapy and rehab for the last 6 months due to an auto accident. And quite honestly, it's very not enjoyable. So, but I am improving on some level, and on those days that I'm not doing that, I am becoming more active because steroid shots make you fat.
Yeah, that is true. You got to get active.
And so I have to get more active, and so I'm doing that. So I refuse to go to Hot Works. So that's just how I am.
It's probably a good choice, but once you go, you're in the club.
I don't want to go in there and start smelling like bacon once I start sweating. And so,
if we're being honest, y'all are just trying to get free sponsorships.
That is true. Yeah. Hot Works, if you're listening, we're definitely looking for that. Seth, tell me what you've been doing.
I go to South Beau Fit because I live in Ragley. It's the closest thing. It's like 5 minutes from my house. And I do whatever I want. So I don't have a specific regimen or anything. So.
You spend a lot of time on your legs, I can tell.
Yeah, it's a tough thing.
Wow. Every day's leg day. Yeah. So, hey, look, we're excited to be with you wherever you are listening or watching or anything. We're really glad to be here with you today. Seth, you've been talking a lot about us doing a podcast like this over the last couple of years. Tell me why. Why would anyone ever want to listen to us about anything, when it comes to a podcast?
Well, that's not a question for me to answer. That's for our listeners. But for me personally, I listen to a lot of different podcasts. I've always found that when I'm watching and listening to someone else having a conversation that is lighthearted, relaxed, open, honest, and usually most of the time the topic of conversation is something that most people wouldn't normally talk about. And so I find that in those moments, I get a lot of information from it. So
yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's why we're here. We're trying to push each other, to learn from each other, to kind of get everybody thinking and honestly put out more content for the people of our church and our community. And so this week, we're going to use the first message that Bryan started on the series this past week called The God Equation. And the message was, can I still trust my Bible? And it was a really good message. We dove into some of those things, but we kind of figured that we would come into this and there would be more questions coming out of that message. And so that's kind of what we're going to look at and for a jumping off point for our conversation today. And I think the best place for us to start, we did get a few questions in from the weekend, and the best place for us to start is probably with the book itself. And so, Bryan, I'm going to go to you right off the bat first. I know you talked a little bit about this on Sunday, but maybe we can go a little bit deeper into it. Can you explain to us how we ended up with what we actually have in our hands today when it comes to the Bible? Why were some books put in and others not? And maybe why do some other Bibles maybe have more books than we see in the Bible that we use?
Yeah, it's an interesting story when you go and read all the history of how these things kind of came about. So all the writings of the Bible, especially the New Testament, all were done within the first century. I think they were all done by AD 90.
Yeah.
All 27 books of the New Testament were written. Of course, all the Old Testament had been written long before that. So all that was done, but you don't see it all sort of recognized as quote unquote the Bible or the canon until around AD 350, and then you get into Athanasius's list in AD 367, where that's like an authoritative sort of list that was then later recognized. So what happens?
I'm praying that there's not going to be a spelling test when it comes to
there's no spelling test. So. Yeah. So what happens between AD 90 and AD, let's say, 400?
Yeah.
What happens in between that? So all these writings were circulating around, and so you mentioned the word canon. So that's a word that was used, and the word comes from the Greek, which means to be the norm or the rule. So they said, okay, what's going to be in the canon or the norm? What's the norm of Christian teaching? And so over time, really three criteria were developed. And this was not, this didn't come out of a political fight. You know, the church didn't suppress knowledge or information. All they were trying to do is figure out what are the common characteristics that we see among what we are perceiving to be authoritative. So understand that these criteria, they didn't make these books authoritative. They just recognized the authority that they already had.
That they already had, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like one author says that the canon is not it's not an authoritative list of books. It's a list of authoritative books. And there's a difference between those two things there. So what were those three criteria? Number one is it had to be either written by an apostle or by a student of one of the apostles. So, you know, First Peter, Paul is considered an apostle. But then you look at like the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Luke. Those guys weren't apostles. Luke was a companion of Paul, so he's a direct student of an apostle. And then Mark was a student of Peter. So really Mark's gospel is Peter's account of
And really,
Jesus' life.
that's what you're looking for the validity of any literature, right? Is like somebody that was actually there.
Somebody. So they wanted this first criteria is like we got to get as connected to Jesus as we can. Like who was there, who saw him do these things, say these things, and so that was the first one. And you know, and so they put that in place and began to see what rises there. And then a second one was that there was widespread acceptance, not just in one church, but widespread acceptance across the churches, that, this was not just another letter, but this was something that was divine. And then third was, does this writing conform to what we know to be the apostles' teaching? Yeah. So understand that the early church, as you read the story, they were huge on the apostles' teaching, That's why some of the earliest creedal confession in 1 Corinthians 15 that I talked about on Sunday was about Jesus appearing to Peter, to the apostles, because they put such an emphasis on the teaching of those guys. And so these letters that they said, came in that first century is, do they conform? Do they match what we've heard from Peter, James, John, Paul, and the rest of them? Now, if you match all three of those, then, like I said, it wasn't that they said, okay, well, this makes it, this doesn't. It was, this one is obviously, we believe, it's from the hand of Paul, but it's got a divine origin as well. We see, what does it have? What is there? And those three criteria come to the surface. And so really what you have is these books were going to be authoritative, whether we liked it or not, because they just had divine authority on them. They were. All the church did was recognize. They didn't make them authoritative. They just recognized the authority. I've talked a lot, but I'll wrap up real quick. So one example that a writer gave one time, it's like, imagine if a group of people came together and said, all right, we've met, and here's what we've decided. We've decided that Beethoven is great music. You'd be like, that's wonderful. Appreciate you doing that. Really didn't need it done, but appreciate that now it's official. Beethoven is great music. Thanks. That's essentially what happened here. Is like, hey, great. Y'all have recognized this. We really didn't need it. We knew what it was, but it's official.
Yeah, the early church was already using them.
Yeah, they were already using them. Yeah. So it's important to understand that story and that progression.
Yes, I think, we looked at a lot on Sunday. We looked at the New Testament. So one of the questions that we had come in was the Old Testament, is you showed that chart. And if you watch the sermon, you've seen that chart from the New Testament. We got asked, is there a chart like that for the Old Testament? Even if there isn't, I'd like to ask Beau, where did we get the Old Testament from? Where did that come from into the early church and how they used it and that sort of thing?
I wonder why the lead pastor got the easy and I got the difficult one. And so the Old Testament is clearly a Jewish book. It's a collection of writings that they break down in three separate parts. And so they want to see them attached to a prophet. And so an example, the first 5 books of the Bible are attached to Moses. He's the head knocker, the lead prophet of Jewish thought. Yeah. And so when it comes to their literature, they also close their canon, or they experience it closing about 430 BC, which is the book of Malachi. Yeah. And so you have a duration of Genesis. The creation narrative is where we start. In the beginning, God. And then you have Malachi, who literally the last words that God said, all in that collection of the Hebrew Bible. And they arrived at it in much of the same way that the New Testament was established as being a canon. Is it attached to a prophet? Is it orthodox? In other words, does it make sense with everything that's going on? And is it attached to a prophet? So an example of a major prophet and minor prophet. So let's just say, Moses is the lead guy, and then you got Malachi, the beginning and the end. And so they literally call them major prophets, minor prophets, and different divisions of it. And so they would call their Bible the Tanakh.
Right.
And so we just call it the Old Testament. The reason why we call it the Old Testament is because we can't spell Hebrew. But it's also the Old Testament and the New Testament is a comparative term in that Jesus came as a fulfillment of the Old Testament. And so we see value in the Old Testament because it proclaimed the Messiahship, and it is the proof and the linear thought of who Jesus would be. And so we were told who the Messiah would be in the Old Testament, and we were shown who the Messiah is in the New Testament. So you compare the two in that way, and they're in perfect harmony.
Yeah, so the modern criticism that we just kind of willy-nilly decided this book makes it, this book doesn't, that doesn't stand up to the actual history
Not at
of
No.
the textual, how it was put together.
Yeah, and even even the other criticism, like I mentioned it, was there was this big fight and debate.
Right,
It was all politics based and church based, and the church suppressed certain things. None of that finds grounds in history.
Yeah, when you really look into it, it doesn't stand up.
No.
Right. And so, if we see, all right, this is how it was put together and we accept that, I guess the real question that we have to ask ourselves is, can we practically trust the Bible to speak into our daily lives, right? Can we trust it for what we're trying to do as we live out our faith? And so, Seth, I want to go to you. You represent the younger generation at this table.
The cynics.
A little bit, but as you've grown, the cynics a little bit for sure. As you've grown in your faith, what's been the driving force behind your growing confidence in the Word? As you've learned more and more.
Yeah, so I don't think that I'm naturally a cynical person. I was raised, just believing the Bible. I had a family that believed the Bible growing up, and they instilled that in me. But I think that there's a popular word right now that's, I guess, in culture with people that like to challenge the Bible, and it's deconstruction. I'm going to deconstruct my faith. I'm gonna clear everything out. And what I found that word is not actually helpful, but it's what can I construct my faith upon?
Yeah.
What can I actually build upon? And so what I had to do personally is not tear my faith apart, but to start from ground zero with nothing, with no prior whatever, and say, like, what can I actually base my entire life around? Like, what can I actually live for? And so my confidence not comes from anything that I could, deconstruct, but like, what can I actually place my feet on that's not going to let me down? That's not going to change. And so what can I build upon, not necessarily what can I tear down, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Bryan used the word timeless a couple of times on Sunday, and that was a word that really stuck out to me. And I've been kind of thinking through this same question, for myself. And I don't know about you guys, what I've noticed is that there's a direct correlation in my life to my confidence in the Word and my consistency in my walk in my faith. And like, there was a point in my life where I had to really ask myself, like, hey, I can say that I trust it. I can say that I believe it, but does my life and how I go after His Word and how I actually pursue Christ through His Word, does it actually line up with what I'm saying? Yeah. And so I had to ask myself those questions. And when I was really honest, those were hard questions, but the results weren't real good for me. And so as I've dove into it and really tried to understand it and grow in my confidence, what I've seen is my consistency in my faith has gone, grown exponentially. There's still a lot of work to be done there, but that's what I've seen. What have you guys seen as you've done some of that?
So real quick before we, you asked me about like confidence, and I think you talking about your confidence in the Word, I think to get there, like, we have to acknowledge the fact that there's times when we don't have confidence. And so like when we have doubts and when like, man, I don't know how to reconcile some of the things that the Bible talks about, or I don't know how to get there. So if we try and brush that under the rug, I don't think that we'll ever be able to arrive at that place that you're talking about.
Totally
So
agree.
It's okay for us to acknowledge the fact that, we might have doubts, or this thing might be a struggle. So.
Yeah, head in the sand doesn't really work.
It hasn't for me, at least.
And I'll
What were you about
speak
to say?
on the other side of that. Like, I didn't grow up in church. So, like, I didn't become a Christian until I was 19. So, like, I don't have anything to deconstruct. Like, I just didn't believe any of it at all.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hinted at that a little bit Sunday, but I thought it was all a joke, you know, just ridiculousness. And the Bible was, you know, old and antiquated, and we probably don't even really know what it was. And it's just a bunch of stuff that people handed down to try to control people and do what they wanted. So that was all my belief. Right. So, like, at this point, when I see people like, oh, I got to deconstruct my faith, I'm like, I did that before I even had it. So,
you came into this fully deconstructed.
Yeah. So, you know, go through the process, but just, you know, don't just doubt, but doubt your doubts too. Like, maybe your doubts are wrong.
That is a good point.
So,
that is a very good point.
Yeah.
I think it's important to allow the tension too.
Yeah.
And I see this and I recognize this as uniquely authoritative, but I feel this in my life.
Yeah.
Or I see this or I'm experiencing this. And so to feel the tension in that is going to bring you, I believe, if you're a Christ follower powered by the Holy Spirit, it's going to bring you to that ultimate truth.
Yeah.
It's going to bring you to a place of belief, to a place of greater faith. And I've seen that in not only in my lives, but I've seen that in lives for a long time, you know, if they were honest.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and so you got to deal honestly. And so if you're coming from a place where you grew up with no faith, no faith legacy, or you grew up, no matter what, the stage needs to be set completely with honesty.
Yeah.
In dealing with who you are and where you're at.
Yeah. If we're being honest, like the church has probably done not the best job at allowing people to wrestle with that tension and like maybe not chastising it, but maybe chastising it a little bit of.
We don't
like
want
if
to
you
deal
have
with it, right?
doubts,
Because
right.
it can get messy.
Yeah.
Like when somebody, I remember that I had an experience in my college years. Beau was a part of this where I read the wrong book, and I started to question some things. But Beau and a couple of my friends loved me through that experience, and were able to help me kind of get through that. And my faith was stronger on the other side, but it was messy in the moment,
right?
Like super messy.
Yeah, but like if they would have chastised you in that moment, or like cast you down,
pushed me away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was it the little engine that could?
No, it was a picture book, but not that one. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons that it might be hard for people to say, yeah, I put my full trust into something is when you do have questions about some of its content. I think that's where we should take our conversation next, is to like look at some of the content and you know, how do we actually reconcile some of the stories that we hear in the Bible? Because, you know, some of the criticism we hear is that it seems too much to believe. Like, how can I actually believe some of these things? And, you know, specifically, Beau, I want you to kind of talk about miracles and like, why don't we see more of them today is a big question that I get from people. And, you know, I'll let you speak to it, and then maybe we'll have some other points from there.
Again, thank you. It's
you're welcome.
no softballs for me. I would say that my first encounter with like really hitting pause and wondering what in the world's going on here is in the creation account. Whenever God says, "Let there be light," and then later He creates the sun and the stars. And I'm like, what? I don't understand that. Then you start looking in the New Testament where Jesus is doing miraculous things. The apostles are doing miraculous things. And so, I mean, this could go way far and way deep. And I know that's not our design, but why do we not see those things? I can't say that we don't, that they're not happening, but I can say that our eyes are not as open as they would have been in the first century. I would say that in America, that we see less than they see in other parts of the world. For sure. I mean, no one can argue with what I saw in South America and Brazil, where a lady who was mute and immobile was able to get up off of what was a deathbed and then 2 weeks later testify in front of hundreds of people. She was left there to die. And so she feels that God divinely healed her. And so whenever I heard that, and this was a lady who had a story, but during her experience, in experiencing brokenness and literally physical brokenness, God not only healed her, but God saved her through that process. And I immediately thought about the woman where Jesus stopped the Jesus parade whenever she touched the hem of his garment, and he turned around and completely restored her publicly, not only healing her body, but restoring her relationally and publicly. And so whenever you see a miracle, it's not for our benefit alone. It's for God to display his glory among his people, to attract other people. And so I believe any society, any culture that is open and seeking to both experience God as he is, not as we imagine him to be, and to their main goal is to put Jesus on display, that I believe that miracles do take place.
So maybe the better question is, why don't we see them, instead of why don't we see them, maybe why don't we recognize them when they actually happen? And so what would be one of y'all's answer to that question of what causes modern American Christianity to miss what the Holy Spirit is actually doing all around us?
I would, just from my perspective, there's a certain level of dependency that we have taken off of God probably and placed it on the many other things that,
like advancements and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and like, I mean, I don't know the situation of this person that you're talking about in South America, but like, you know, there's a lot of people that are a lot worse off than we are. And so like their dependency when placed upon Christ is, you know, it could be different than what our dependency looks like here. You know, we have a lot more things to distract us. We have a lot more things to be comfortable with. I don't know.
What's the greater miracle? To see someone who has lame legs get up and walk, or to see someone have faith and believe in Jesus for the first time?
Yeah. You know, Bryan talked about how he came completely deconstructed. It's a miracle for him to go from that to what Jesus did in his life. That in and of itself, and sometimes we miss that. We don't see that as the miracle that it is.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, why don't we perhaps see it as much, and why don't we recognize it when we do? And I'll give you a personal story. When you know, Shay and I know that our daughter Evangeline was born deaf. Through a whole series of tests, she failed every one of them. We prayed over her. We anointed her head with oil, as Scripture says to do. Prayed over her, and 2 weeks later, right before that appointment, this 2 week went by, and right before that appointment, her next hearing test, we did all the prayer and anointing her head with oil and gathered around her. And she went and she passed that test, and has been hearing ever since. So it was hilarious. I mean, at one point, the lady was trying to put electrodes on her head. She's like, "There's something on her forehead and it just won't stick." And I remember saying, I was like, "I don't know what's on there." I don't know what we did. So anyway, but the lady was like, well, I guess, you know, she must have just had some stuff in her ears that cleared out. And that's why she passed this one. Wow. It's like, so it just, you know, I mean, I didn't go into it with her because she didn't know the backstory and she didn't know who we were or anything like that. But it's like, well, that's one way you could explain it if you want to. But I'm making a choice. And it comes down to this. Gets in a philosophical issue of how you're going to choose to see the world. You're going to choose to see it from a naturalistic standpoint where the world is closed. Even if God exists, a deistic standpoint, he's not involved in it. He's just hands off. Naturalistic standpoint, he doesn't even exist. It's just a closed material universe. Well, then you have to explain these things and with other means, natural means. God can't come to the equation. But if you believe like we do, and you also believe that, you know, we're not cessationists, that God still does miracles. They didn't end at the first century, like some will say. Right. We believe that he still does them. Then you begin to recognize and see these things all over the place. You know, so I think it's just a matter of, are your eyes open?
Yeah.
You know,
100%.
That's my opinion on it.
For sure.
So I think while we are in a culture where we are attached to everything around the world, that is a distraction for us to see what's right in front of us. And so, you know, while Bryan has that experience with his daughter, we have two children in our home that have both been miraculous. We had one born with a kidney disease that from one doctor's visit to the next, it was completely gone. And that happened after we prayed that God would show himself strong on behalf of my son. And he did.
Yeah.
And I have nothing to do with that. There was 6 men in that circle. They remain nameless, but they know that they were experiencing God in that moment.
That's right.
And then we had a closed womb in our home.
Yeah.
Where, you know, Olivia couldn't have children. We had multiple miscarriages over the course of 4 years. And the doctor says, just nothing can be done. And right after that, our daughter Eden was born.
There you go.
And so all of those moments came after a tremendous time of trust and asking.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if it would come without trust, without asking, but I do know in our case it was trust and asking.
Yeah.
I'd be willing to bet most of the people listening have stories like that. Each of us at this table definitely have stories of really God showing himself big in situations where you wouldn't think that it would be possible. And so, yeah, I mean, but moving forward, even if we accept the miracles and we accept all that, one of the biggest modern criticism, this was a question that we had that came in was, but what about where the Bible contradicts itself?
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so that's something that gets thrown out a lot in modern America. And as we're thinking through this, so Bryan, how do you, if I'm going to trust something, I got to be able to deal with where it would contradict itself. Mm-hmm. So would you first say, there are contradictions? And if you would, how do you deal with them?
Okay, so first I would say that no, Sam Harris is wrong. There are no contradictions. Sam Harris is another one of those guys, he's super smart, not very wise. Just like I mentioned Bart Ehrman, super smart, not very wise. And so, and y'all can go and find this stuff if you want. They've got all these sophisticated tools of here's these 101 or whatever, 1001 contradictions in the Bible. But really, when you go and dig into the contradiction, it's really kind of sad, because a lot of times when I look at that, it's like, it's the equivalent of if I were to come to you, John, and say, hey man, did you see the basketball game last night? The Pelicans, that's the New Orleans team, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, see, the Pelicans, that's how much I know about basketball.
Yeah, you really love it, don't you?
We can do football. All right, so let's do football. All right. So did you see that the Cowboys beat the Saints and they beat them 105-90? And you would look at me like, what are you talking about? 105, like that's not basketball scores. Like, do you even know? Like, you don't understand the nuances of what's going on here. And a lot of these contradictions, if all of them are like that. It's like if they don't know how to read the Bible, they don't quite understand how to look at it. And sometimes they just completely get the facts wrong. It's, they'll say the same person, this is talking about the same person, and it's just not some of these contradictions. So, one, I can't remember where it is, but like in David's time, you got one guy, it says he killed 300 people, and then another, it says they killed 800 people. And it's like, oh, see, this is a contradiction. It's like, no, those are two different people, y'all. Like, read it a little more carefully, please. And then the other thing I would say is, this is, when you get into the Gospels, this is eyewitness testimony. Just like in a courtroom today, if all four of us walked out to the road here and saw an accident and we got on northeast, south, and west of it, we would all go to court and we would say, okay, I saw, it looked like he crossed the line here. You would say, oh, it looked like he never crossed the line. And then Seth would say something like, well, I saw him kind of come from the other direction.
That's right.
None of us were wrong. We all just saw from different perspectives. And we were all right. We just saw it from a different perspective. And so that's what you get in the New Testament, especially in the Gospels with Jesus, is you have especially in Luke, Luke talked to hundreds of people and wrote down their perspectives on what they saw. They were all right, all accurate. And so I would tell you there are zero contradictions in the Bible.
So what do you tell the person, like, to play devil's advocate, like, that reads the Bible and comes to it and...
I always do that about you, by the way.
It comes to the Bible and is like, I don't know what to do with this. This seems like a contradiction to me. Like, what do you tell that person?
I don't tell them anything. I walk through with them. That's a relational thing that I want to go through with them. Yeah. Gotcha. That's a very, I don't want to be dismissive of them either. That's a very real thing. It's like, okay, let me appreciate that with you. Let me understand where do you see the contradiction? Why do you think it's there?
Yeah.
Are you willing to believe that there could be a resolution?
Right. So I guess
sometimes people aren't willing to get to that third one. It's like, no, I don't want to believe there's a resolution. See, it's wrong and it's wrong. That means I don't have to follow it. That's ultimately what's at the core of it.
Right. Yeah. So for me, like, let's say that I come to the Bible, I'm reading a section of scripture, and I feel like there's a contradiction. What should I do next?
What should you should talk to friends about it. You should voice it. You should, work it out with people, together. And if you got your closest group of friends, they can't work it out, then go somewhere, go to something, and work it out. There are answers to all of these things, and you don't only have to rely on the internet. I wouldn't rely only on the internet. I would. You
gotta be very careful with where you go on that.
It's not all bad, of course, know.
This is going to be on the internet.
Yeah, of course. But like, but go maybe talk to, a pastor or a seminary professor or somebody that does have, hopefully a heritage of study and understanding and knows and can walk with you through that process.
I think the other thing too, that if you are that person, I would encourage you that there's more work to be done in this book alone. And so that it explains some things in itself. And so as a believer, again, I mentioned this earlier, but as a believer with the Holy Spirit living within us, one of the primary roles of the Holy Spirit is to be our teacher. And so the teacher will lead us to all truth. He will explain these things to us. He'll give us insight as to what it says. But it doesn't say what it doesn't say. And so sometimes that's where these contradictions come up.
And that's where we have to be careful about who we're listening to, who we're trusting with that type of.
Yeah.
Well, it requires work too. Like, you can't just read the Bible and then
You got to put.
I don't understand that. There's a contradiction, so I don't have. Yeah, exactly.
And this is where I would say, doubt your doubt. You could be wrong. It just could be.
It requires humility.
Your doubt is a little wrong.
For sure.
As people reading the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a really good conversation. I want us to end with one more question. And Seth, we're going to start with you. Because to me, in our culture, we live in a culture that tells us over and over and over again to, you can't trust it.
Right.
Why would you put your faith in anything like the Bible? And so, and they would basically tell you not to. And so what's your advice for someone who's trying to push back against those demands from our culture that really seem very loud to a lot of people?
Yeah. So those, you mentioned this, but like those types of demands are probably growing with how much that we see those and in our workplaces and schools and whatnot. And so like there's probably more pushback now than there's been about the Bible not being true. And maybe I'm wrong in that. But when I think about it, I just think that the world is experiencing more brokenness now than it's ever experienced. And if there's more pushback against the Bible than if we've ever experienced, something's not working, something's not adding up. And so like let's take marriage and sex, for example. And so the world will say that sleep with whoever you want to sleep with and be married, to whoever, whenever, and however many times, and there's no rules for that. And so but if we look at statistics, like there's more divorce rates now, there's more people that are unhappy in their marriages now than there's ever been. And so to me, like when I look at the Bible and what it teaches, it works out better for my life. Personally, like just from a personal level, and I know that's not super intellectual, but like what the world is telling me is obviously not working.
That's right.
And not just marriage, and in all areas of life. So
yeah, I would, if somebody came to me and said, well, how, I don't trust the Bible. I can't trust the Bible. I can't believe you trust the Bible. I would ask the question that, like, I think I mentioned this Sunday of, well, what else do you have in mind?
That's right.
You got something else in mind?
What works better?
Yeah. Is something else, do you find something else working better? Because I don't see it. I'm with Seth on this one of like, I'll put the Bible up against any book of worldview out there. And I guarantee you, what you're going to find is not only is your life going to be more enriched, but as you live it out, it's actually going to work. Yeah. Like it's going to work the way it says it's going to work. Because lo and behold, how do we know? Well, because the guy who wrote all of this, the man who wrote all this, God, wrote that too.
Yes.
So, yeah.
That's so true. Yeah. Well, I want to thank all of you who have watched and listened. I also want to thank you boys for being a part of the First Take podcast. It was really fun. If you like this type of content and you want more of it, make sure that you subscribe to the First Moss Bluff podcast on wherever you get your podcast. You can also like it, share it with your friends if you think they could benefit from it. Also, comment any other questions or comments that you might have. Make sure that you do that. We'll try to respond to as many of them as we can. We're going to be back with another episode next week where we start to answer the question, how can we confidently say that there's only one true religion, right? And so that's going to be another good one. Should be very, very interesting. But until then, we'll say goodbye.
Later.